In a straight skirt, I shall first start with demonstrating or illustrating the features in a straight skirt. I will draw the front part of the skirt and the back part of the skirt. This is the front part of our skirt. As you can see from our illustration, our front part of the skirt has a waistband. These are the design details. It has a waistband. We've got darts, one dart, which is the front dart. And in the pattern pieces, we only have one pattern for the front, and then one front pattern. When I talk about one front pattern, I mean there is no seam in between the front. It is just a continuous skirt. Like in this skirt here, this is a real skirt. Like in this skirt, this is the kind of skirt we shall be making. It has only one dart at the front. And then we've got the back. At the back, we've got two parts. We've got one pattern piece and the other pattern piece. And then we need to realize that at the back, we've got two darts in each part. And then there's a button along the waistline. So this is the kind of skirt we shall be developing patterns so that at the comfort of your home, you will be in a position to cut a straight skirt, put it on, and feel proud. The measurements for the skirt will be as shown. We've got the waist, which is 24 inches. We've got the hips, 40 inches. Waist to hip, 8 inches. And then we have the skirt length at 26 inches. When I talk about waist to hip of the skirt, starting from the waist, this is the waistline. So when I talk about the waist, this is the measurement we are talking about, the waistline. Then waist to hip, it is the measurement from the waist to the fullest part. This, the fullest part of the bodice of the skirt. This is along that side. This is the hip line of a standard figure. So we are saying the waist, it's 24 inches. Then the hips, it's 40 inches, and we've got waist to hip. Waist to hip, it is this distance from the waist to the fullest part in the lower part of a female figure. Then we've got the waist skirt length. Skirt length is the measurement from the waistline down. And we usually say that this skirt length is affected by fashion. It is affected by fashion in this manner. A skirt could be to the knee length, it could be mini skirt, an ankle length skirt, or floor length. When we talk about the skirt length, it should be determined by the specific client or the specific customer in question. In this class, we shall work on how to develop patterns for a specific straight skirt with a vent slit at the back to facilitate movement. Let's continue together. In developing patterns for this straight skirt, we need to put into consideration the measurements. We've got the waist, we've got the hips, we've got the waist to hip, and we've got the waist skirt length. For us to begin, we need to identify the lines, the major lines in production of these patterns. You outline a line. You also need to outline another line across your fabric. And then once you identify this straight line, this will be your center back line. Center back line. So this becomes your point number 1 when developing a skirt. For you to get point number 2, you need to divide the hip measurement. The hips measurement, which is 40, you divide it by 2, you get 20 plus 1.5 of an inch. So this will be 21.5. You measure from point 1 to point 2, you measure your 21.5 centimeters, inches, and then this becomes your point number 2. For you to get point number 3, you need to take your skirt length. The skirt length is 26. So with your tape measure, you measure from point 1 to point number 3, 26 centimeters. So this gets to be your point number 3. Then you square this line down and you square across so that these lines touch each other. And then you've got your basic construction lines for the skirt. So this is my point number 4. The moment I've got these lines, I already have my center back and I have my center front of the skirt. When I talk about a center back or a center front, this line, it is an imaginary line at the center part of your skirt. This is the center front of your skirt, of your front skirt. And then for the back, the line along which the zip mainly is attached, it's our center back. So I've got the 2 lines, I've got the center back and I've got the center front of the skirt. So for me to get the lines, now I need to identify, because I've got the 4 points, I need 0.5. So for me to be in a position to get 0.5, I will use my waist to hip. I want to identify the hip. Waist to hip, we've got 8 inches. So you measure 8 inches. From where they lie, you write that is your point number 5. Then you need to square across this line. You square it across. This gets to be point number 6. To be in a position to identify that, you need to write that this is your hip line. So far, we've got the waistline. This is the waistline. We've got the hip line and we've got the hemline of our skirt. Very crucial lines. We've got the center back line and then we've got the center front line. Our construction lines for this skirt. So to move from there, we need point number 7. And how do we get our point number 7? We will divide our hips by 4. So you get quarter hips. And our hip is 40 inches. So a quarter of this should be 10. So we will measure 10 inches plus 1.5. 5 to 7. So this will be 11.5. You measure 11.5. And then from there, you establish your point number 7. You establish your point number 7 along the hip line. So that is my point number 7. Then you square down this line. Square this line down to point number 8 along the hemline. So this gets to be my point number 8. So far, we've got points 1 to 8. To get point 9, I need to tackle the waistline. So I'll get a quarter of the waist. And in our case, our waistline is 24 inches. So I'll get 24 inches divided by 4. And this will give us 6 inches. And because at the back, we've got 2 darts as in our skirt here. One part of the skirt has 2 darts. So I will add an allowance of 4.25 of centimeter, which is equivalent to 1.5 inches. So we give it plus 1.5. So this will be 7.5 inches. It is important to note that this 1.5 of an inch, it is the accommodation for the 2 darts in each part. So I will measure 7.5 from point number 1, and then I will indicate that this is my point number 9. And because this is my point number 9, I need to establish point number 10. And in number 10, we move 0.5 of an inch, 0.5. You pick your tape measure, you measure 0.5, and then you identify your point number 10 slightly up from point number 9. So this gets to be my point number 10. This is my point number 10. Now I will divide the line from 1 to 10. I need to join this line with a straight line to 1. I get that. And then you divide the line from 1 to 10 into 3. And because 1 to 10 is 7.5, I will measure this distance and I divide it into 3 equal parts, a third of each. So in this case, you need to measure, and then at the middle of each point, you label your numbers. So this will be number 11, and this will be number 12. We are moving together. From there, I need to join the line touching point 7 to this line from point 10. I get that. From there, I will establish the 2 darts. Each should be 2 centimeters, each dart. So from this point number 11, I will measure 14 centimeters, and then I square down this line. You square down 14 centimeters. This gets to be your point number 13. Then your point number 14 will be 12.5 centimeters from point number 12. So I measure again 12.5, and this gets to be my point number 14. I will establish a dart from there. Each dart should be 2 centimeters wide. So I'll measure 2 centimeters of this dart. I create my dart, and I join these 2 lines together. So that is my first dart. And then I also create another dart at point number 14. So those are my 2 darts at point number 13 and at point number 14. I've got my darts. And then to curve my skirt outward, I will need, along these 10 and 7, I'll need to measure 0.5 of a centimeter, 0.5 of a centimeter, so that I can curve outward for the hip to present itself. Because remember, in a human figure, there is no straight part. Most of the body parts are curved. So we need to curve out so that we can get the hip. You need to use right tools to be in a position to curve your skirt. So that point remains curved. And in this, we can comfortably say that we've got our back part of the skirt complete. Because there are 2 parts as of our design, we need to identify the patterns. This is only one part, and we need two. So in your instructions, you need to indicate that you cut 2 pieces. Cut 2. Meaning, we'll have one part for the left and another right part for the back skirt. So this is the basic pattern for the back skirt. You also need to indicate a grain line. When I talk about a grain line, it is a line indicating how the fabric will be laid. Will the fabric be laid on a straight grain? Will it be laid on the cross? Or are we going to lay our pattern on the weft? This is a straight grain, meaning that our skirt will be cut on a straight grain. Once we've got established our pattern, it is important to note that this part needs to be traced out. We need to trace it out because we've only identified the first part of the skirt. This was the part that we've established. So the moment we cut 1, we've cut 1 piece. But the moment we indicate cut 2, then we duplicate 2 of these patterns. With this pattern, we need to allow for seam allowances, stitching allowances. So we will trace out this part of the skirt. We give it seam allowance. Seam allowance, it is whereby you cut and will have allowance to stitch. So from there, you will need to understand that in our skirt, it has a zip at the back. And this zip, we need to give it allowance of 1 inch stitching allowance for the zip. So I will indicate from my pattern, which is complete, from this complete back pattern. This is the complete back pattern with 2 darts. You need to indicate that this is your center back. You need to allow for stitching allowance along this part, and you give it 1.5 of an inch. You give the allowance. Along the center back, you give it an allowance, and at the hemline, it will again be dictated by the design of the skirt. And if the fabric is heavy, you need to give it 1 inch so that you can fold. If you are dealing with a light fabric like chiffon, you can give it 2 centimeters. You can give it a centimeter or 0.5 a centimeter, and then you'll be able to hem. So I will give it an allowance of 1 inch at the bottom. Along the side seam, I will only give it 1 inch seam allowance. And it is important at this point to note that along the hip, you need to indicate with a notch. This notch is quite important so that when you are cutting out and when you are stitching, you will be in a position to know where your hemline lies. So that is the seam allowance. At this waistline, because it is an enclosed seam, you only give an allowance of 0.5 of an inch. You give it 0.5, and then you give that notch to show that that is the dart. You give another notch there, and there we have our back pattern for the skirt complete. So this is the back part, cut 2. Yes, and it is a complete pattern for the back. We can move on and remind ourselves. Remember we said that in the skirt, you will be guided by the patterns in the skirt. And in our skirt, it has 2 parts at the back. It has the left and the right side of the back. We've got 2 darts. And then we've been given the measurements to follow. We've got the waistline. We've got the hips. we've got the waist to hip, we've got the skirt length, and then from there we establish the construction lines. Here we are, we've got the waist. From the waistline, you divide it by 4. You give it an allowance of 4.25 centimeters for the darts. Each dart at the back, the first dart is 14 centimeters. The second dart is 12.5 centimeters. And then our skirt length is 26 inches. Waist to hip, 8 inches. And then our hip line, we'll divide the 40 by 2 to get our point 1 to 2. And we'll be in a position to get our first quarter of the skirt. 5 to 7 was a division between 40 divided by 4, and then we are able to get our first quarter along the hip. There we are with a finished pattern for the back. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will be meeting again for the next part of the skirt. Thank you.